In this week's Top Gear, the new Ford Escort Estate. How well does it match the opposition as a load carrier? The professionals battle for the title of Business Driver of the Year. And Jaguar defend their endurance record on the banking at Daytona. Hello and welcome to this week's Top Gear. This is one of the most famous Lagondas of all time. It won Le Mans in 1935 and so brought to an end a run of 4 straight victories for Alfa Romeo. Even in the presently depressed state of the market, it's worth about £500,000. And cars like this, of course, have certainly joined the masterpiece on the wall as an investment. The problem is that cars left in garages soon start to rot. What do you do to make sure it's safe when you have to leave the country, say, for a couple of months? Now, for many people, this anonymous building somewhere in the home counties provides a near perfect solution. Now, inside it's a regular Aladdin's cave of desirable vehicles of every make and age. And this is just one of a number of secret stores, called indeed hotels for fine automobiles, by the company that runs them, Store a Car, and they will take over the chores of looking after your fabulous Ferrari or your luscious Lamborghini, keeping it secure and dry and well cared for until you ask for it to be delivered to the airport or the classic car show of your choice. There are any number of cars here, of course, to drool over. There are Astons and Jaguars and Porsches and Mercedes sports cars. These 3 huge stretch Mercedes limos don't fall into the drool category, but they represent for one Arab sheikh what you might call his standard load carriers. The equivalent, perhaps, of the rather more modest family's estate car. Now, as it happens, I've been testing 3 of the newest additions in the small and medium sectors of the estate car market. Now, it might be reasonable to surmise that estate cars were going out of fashion, rendered obsolete to some extent by the advent of the hatchback, which offers the best of both worlds, the compactness of the saloon, plus a door at the back. In fact, the reverse is true. As Europe gets more affluent, the estate market gets more buoyant and more competitive. Everybody wants a slice of it. And these are 3 new offerings in the small to medium sector. Now, the heart of the matter with estates, of course, is the space, the load carrying capacity. So let's start right there at the back end. Well, this is Ford's contender, the estate version of the new Escort. It's wider and a bit higher than the current model and much longer, and the extra length plus the way they've handled this rear end makes it by far the best looking of the new Escort so far. Now, for some reason, Ford have left the tailgate off the central locking system. So when you arrive at the car with your packages, you have to rummage for your key, which could be a bit annoying. But once you've got the tailgate open, you can see a lot of thought has gone into it. It lifts well out of the way, so no chance of banging your head. It's well contoured, so it doesn't drop rain down the back of your neck. There are no awkward projections around the loading area at all, so it's very easy to get the packages in, and there is more loading capacity than the current Escort estate. Now, the tonneau cover, sadly, only comes with GLX and gear versions, which is a pity because, of course, estates are vulnerable to prying eyes. You need some sort of cover to hide the goodies, and not very strongly made. I've had the car for a week, already chipped off the corner of the fastening, so rather bad, that. Now, to get those extra boxes in, you've got the standard 60-40 split, which gives you a maximum loading length of 1.7 metres, which is very good for a car of this size. Now, if it's longer or bulkier than that, you're taking the family on holiday, the GLX and gear versions get this neat, aerodynamically designed roof rack with rails to protect the roof and adjustable slides. Could be a real boon. OK, now let's drive it. Well, this is the gear version, but even so, the trim is nothing special. But the build quality is very high, the use of space is excellent, both in the front and the rear. I've had my 3 children in the rear, for example, with all their bits and bobs, no problem at all. And the ride and handling is, if anything, better than the Escort saloon. So the overall impression is quite favourable. But 2 main quibbles. One is noise. Estates tend to be pretty noisy anyway, but with this car, the engine growls at you at low revs, it becomes raucous at high revs, put on full lock, sounds as if you've got a dog trapped under the wheel. The other is price, because with power steering fitted, you get very little change out of £13,000, and that could be a real problem for Ford. Now, when is a Ford not a Ford? Well, in this particular case, it's when it's a Nissan. The wind tunnel, of course, doesn't know the difference between an Escort estate and a Primera estate. These two have turned out to have a remarkably similar outline. At first glance, anyway, this is the 1.6 LS. In fact, it's considerably bigger than the Escort estate, 4 inches higher, about 8 inches longer. Notice no roof rack. Apparently they don't encourage one. They've given it a much straighter tailgate line. Now, one of the problems for an estate buyer is getting a decent comparison of different load carrying capacities because they use so many different figures: inches, millimetres, cubic decameters, even litres. It's a real jungle at the very least. You need a pocket calculator. Now, having pressed a lot of buttons, we've come to the conclusion that although the Primera is larger, it actually has slightly less load carrying capacity than the Escort. Now, why is that? Well, in part at least, it's because they've given the rear seat passengers a bit more legroom. But they also handle the rear seat quite differently from Ford. They've split the seat as well as the back. So you've got this very flexible arrangement. You can have 3 people up and a lot of load carrying capacity, or 4 people up and a long load here. And these rear seats also recline. As to its performance on the road, it's certainly well up in its class. The 16-valve engine is very spirited throughout the range and quiet. They've obviously spent a lot of time and effort in dampening out the noise. The ride is impressively smooth. The handling, this is a very easy car to drive well. It's a very solid and stable platform, no doubt in part due to the sophisticated multi-link suspension at the front end. The price, enough to make Ford as sick as a parrot because it's rumoured to be around £11,500, complete with power steering. If I have a quibble, it is that they don't even offer ABS as an option below 2 litres. Now, the Tempra station wagon from Fiat, this one's from Rome, by the way, so it's left-hand drive, is by far the biggest of the 3 cars we're looking at. In fact, it's really in Sierra and Montego country. It's 6 inches higher, for example, 9 inches longer than the Escort. It's also by far the most distinctive with this raised rear roofline, although the roof rack looks somewhat rudimentary, perhaps something of an afterthought. Now, this big convex tailgate is somewhat idiosyncratic in that 90% goes up, but 10% goes down. They say it reduces the clearance arc you need at the back end, as well as giving you a low sill for putting in the heavy loads. Now, the boot space on the Tempra is positively cavernous. It's 14% bigger, for example, than the Primera. What's more, the tonneau cover comes as standard, as indeed it should. And I must say I like these boot rails for protecting the carpet. Right. In fact, space is one of the real pluses of this car. It's very roomy in the front and the back, and it's got the same flexible rear seat arrangement as in the Primera. This engine is positively eager all the way up through 5th gear, and the ride is very smooth indeed. Mind you, there's a fair bit of noise, both wind and tyre noise at speed, and Tempra is a leaner. It leans its way through the bend. The price? With the 1.6-litre engine, it's around £11,500, so bang on the nose with Primera. With the 1.8-litre engine, it's around £13,000, so very competitive indeed with the Ford. And the verdict? Well, all 3 vehicles show just how far estate cars have come over the past couple of years. You've got saloon car performance and sophistication with all that extra load space. The Ford is a very well put-together vehicle, spoilt, I think, by the engine and the price. The Tempra is a lot of lively car for the money, and I forgot to mention that 70% of the body is now galvanised for corrosion protection. But my vote goes to the Primera. It hasn't got the most load space, hasn't even got a tonneau cover, but it has got very fine build quality and superb handling. Now, for many people, one of the rewards for great success in business would be a Lamborghini Countach like this. Indeed, there are 4 or 5 of them here. Although, on the way to such a pinnacle, they're likely to have been many thousands of miles driving rather more humble transport. But even doing that job well can bring its own reward. Indeed, there is a competition for Business Driver of the Year. Tiff Needell went along to Brands Hatch to observe the finalists and have a go himself.
The Cellnet Business Driver competition is now in its 3rd year, and competitors are tested by a variety of challenges devised by organiser Jonathan Palmer.
Right, Jonathan, we're approaching one of your devious tests. What's this going to discover in a competitor?
This is going to see how well a competitor can react to a sudden emergency. A traffic light ahead, normally green, may go to red, simulating an obstruction's moved into the way, and he'll have to suddenly cadence brake like that.
Competitors from all over the country have entered the competition to win a Ford Sierra Sapphire and prove that high-mileage business drivers can be both safe, skillful and observant. 10,000 entries have been whittled down to today's 24 finalists, whose skills have to be tested in 4 sections. Driving tests against the stopwatch formed one section that tested the precision of driving at a competitive pace, with any marker cones knocked over, adding a 2-point penalty to the driver's scorecard. The second section involves a specially adapted car whose wheels can be turned to simulate all sorts of problems under the strict control of Heidi Tomlinson.
First exercise, Tiff. You need to be at 15 miles an hour as you approach the first blue cone on the right, and then drive through the chicane and out through the box at the far end.
Even I can do that, can't I? Right.
Wait and see.
Heidi can cause all sorts of problems with her little box of tricks, starting with a rear wheel skid mid-chicane.
Oh, that's a cone.
Oh.
So is that lost marks for a cone, is it?
2 points for each cone.
Dear, my dear. Right, next.
OK, number 2. If you'd like to aim at the large cone down at the far end, that's Granny, and then I'll give you the instruction to brake. 20 miles an hour. OK, brake right.
At least I missed Granny, so I was doing something right. Next, Heidi simulated straight-line braking on sheet ice that called for cadence braking on and off the brakes to minimise lock-up that worked eventually. The next element saw me at my best. Power oversteer to perfection. But power understeer I never like.
Of course, if I'd had a practice run, I would have done better, but I think we can see that's a pretty good test. Let's see how the competitors get on.
The competitors were given one practice run, with Heidi's father, John, giving the instruction before daughter stepped on board for the examinations. Each contestant being put through an identical series of skid control simulations and being marked on their performance.
I saw a cone flying there. How did you get on with the skid master?
Well, apparently I did quite well at it. I just hit 2 cones, that was all, so I didn't lose many points there, so it was quite good, hopefully.
On the track, tests for part 3 include keeping the ball in the dish on the bonnet and expecting the unexpected.
Well, this is the test we saw Jonathan do. Let's see how the competitors do. I don't think that was quite right.
As soon as you start reading, I'll start the watch. OK, it's starting now.
Part 4 is the advanced road driving test, when competitors have 25 minutes to plan a route from A to B. Within the route area, there will be all sorts of potential hold-ups, which could be avoided by use of the car phone. Back on the track, and the problems become more dramatic for our hard-pressed business drivers, as a trip onto the Grand Prix circuit brings them face-to-face with a very unexpected accident. Point scoring starts with good positioning of your car, hazard lamps, and the use of the car phone to summon emergency services.
Right, you reasonably okay. I'll come back to you later, okay?
Members of the casualty union play their parts well. Few competitors pick up bonus points for getting the cigarette extinguished, although most have a go at resuscitating the dummy before the professionals arrive on the scene.
Oh, that's right, we've got this. No, she's not breathing. I can't find a pulse.
OK, my colleague...
Hello, hello, can you hear me?
I believe there are 3 casualties altogether. There's one very slightly injured who's helping.
While the ambulance crew take care of the injured, our examiner makes notes and the police seek useful information.
I was overtaking or about to overtake a car further around here. There was a grey-coloured Granada being driven at very high speed, and in fact it overtook in a rather cavalier fashion, I might say.
So it's a grey Granada?
A grey Granada.
The car was driven in a cavalier fashion and caused no end of memory problems, with Nigel's misty recollections no exception.
Are you a bit surprised that the grey Granada that overtook you dangerously was actually a maroon Sierra Cosworth?
I am very surprised at that, yes. Yes, indeed, but yes.
Points for observation lost there. And at the end of the day, it's anyone's guess who's come out on top with a room full of hope and apprehension after a very testing day. When announced, it's Nicola Lloyd who was declared Business Driver of the Year. One up for women drivers, a Sierra for her mantelpiece, and an embarrassing admission.
And what was the biggest surprise of the day for you?
Finding the accident round the bend. Couldn't believe it. And I forgot to use the phone.
Now, this particular car certainly isn't typical of most of the vehicles stored here, although it is indeed the sort of car that Tiff conducts most of his business in. It's the Nimrod Aston Martin that he shared with A.J. Foyt at Daytona in the early 80s before he became a regular Porsche driver. Now, earlier this year, he was out in Florida challenging Jaguar's attempt to repeat their success in the Daytona 24-hour race, some compensation along with their Le Mans win for losing their World Championship to the Mercedes Silver Arrows. Tony Mason went along to observe sports car racing American style.
It's been true since racing began. In order to finish first you've got to finish. So at the start of a 24-hour race, you don't charge off flat out as though it was a 10-lap club event. But American TV's only covering the first half hour live, and once the green flag drops, the old red mist doesn't half cloud the reason. So the white Jaguar number 2 was in there fighting with its rivals for a bit of fleeting glory at the front. In fact, although Mercedes wasn't at Daytona, the main opposition still came from Germany in the shape of the black Porsche driven by the famous Andretti family and the Yost Porsche number 6 put on pole position by Frenchman Bob Wallach. Porsche had won this race 17 times, but their 962 model first appeared here in 1984 and was expected to be blown off by the favourites, the high-tech teams from Jaguar and Nissan. The Nissans, champions in American sports car racing for the last 3 years, were to be the Hares. Running to European as opposed to US rules, they were gambling more power and lower weight for less fuel and much slower refuelling. As a result, they would need to run 2 seconds a lap quicker throughout. At the start, Julian Bailey's spin spoilt the game plan a bit, but he was confident.
Our car's running well. Even if it rains, the car's very good in the rain. But here, one of the biggest problems is all the traffic. You know, there's so many slow cars, and it's just going to be a bit of a lottery. But we hope we can stay there.
Fellow Brit Derek Warwick in the Jaguar was equally confident.
I think the package is good. You know, we got a good team here with TWR and Jaguar. And, you know, as long as the weather stays good, you know, we have a known package and we know we can do a good job.
But the weekend had started badly for Jaguar, with a spin in the wet in practice. John Nielsen was just badly shaken, but the car was wrecked and half Jaguar's effort was spent. That didn't seem to worry Davy Jones in the sister car as he jockeyed for position through the traffic in the first hectic stint.
I was actually having a lot of fun. You know, I think that the Andretti Porsche and the Bob Wallach Porsche, I think they had a little boost turned up, so they were quite a bit quicker down the straight. But then when the Nissan came in, the 4 of us, we were having a lot of fun. I think we were all very professional at what we were doing and being very careful on every move, but we all were racing out there.
Though strong in Europe, both German Porsche teams had little US experience, and so the Rob Dyson Porsche number 16 stood a very good chance, especially as they'd taken on our man Tiff Needell, third behind the Jaguars at Le Mans last year.
We are probably the most experienced Porsche team in America racing, as opposed to Andretti and Answers are quite new teams, and so is Yost, really. So we reckon the Jaguar's only one left, that'll break down, Nissan's load of transmission problems, and then it'll be a Porsche race, and Dyson will be the best Porsche.
That sounds like being confident to me.
Easy job. All I've got to do is keep out of the puddles and keep on the black bit, and yes.
What about the weather?
Well, it is going to be the big story of the race, I think. I mean, it's so changeable, and we're all very worried about what it might do to us.
The weather was keeping everyone guessing before the start, but the professionals have all the angles covered. How do you read the weather, Tony?
I'll read it. I pick up my bit of paper that says, what's the time? 3 o'clock, rain or showers, light rain and light rain. So
you believe that, do you?
To the minute. The guy is very, very good.
Sure enough, the rain came down at the predicted hour, and with everyone tiptoeing round on slick tyres, the pace car came out to slow everything down. 2.5 hours into the race, and it'll soon be very dark. Now, this isn't the Florida we expected. No sunshine, just big black clouds and heavy rain. The cars have all come in, they've changed tyres, but the order is very much as expected. The Nissan's fighting it out with the Jaguar up there, and Tiff's team just behind them.
John Paul dived in as soon as it rained, and we got onto wet tyres, about the first car to get onto wet tyres. And the leaders were still floundering around, you know, in the wet on slicks. And we think we got ahead of them on a quick pit stop, but the organisers don't agree.
Now it's your turn to go out, shouldn't you be going now?
Well, no, because when they stopped to put the wet tyres on, they filled it back up with fuel again. So it means John Paul will do what, sort of 1.5 stints.
Anyway, otherwise everything will go into plan, is it?
Yeah, I never wanted to drive in the daylight anyway, I mean.
Daytona is unlike Le Mans in a number of ways, and one of them is the lack of daylight. Instead of 5 or 6 hours of darkness in French midsummer, it's 12 hours at least of Floridian February night, and it starts barely 4 hours in. How's it going, Tony?
Yeah, it seems to be going fine. We just had a driver change and, you know, new tyres and fuel, about a 31-second stop, which is a couple of seconds slower than what we like, but I mean, in these conditions, that's not bad at all.
And your weather forecasting paper is on schedule of working, is it?
You can see that, can't you?
It was completely dark and still very wet when Tiff came to take over from John Paul. But the conditions don't necessarily limit one's enjoyment.
It was good. Car ran pretty good. We have very good downforce putting the power down off the corners. It doesn't spin the wheels like most everyone else, so we can get the shots off the corners. It's fun.
Pretty slippery out there, though.
Yeah. It's nice to be in a motor race.
The spectators likewise seemed content to sit out the rain, with warmth, food, and for some good shelter. But the pace doesn't slacken, and keeping out of each other's way can produce some exciting moments.
I had a daze of thunder with the Jaguar on the bank.
I don't know what happened. You got a plane, all of a sudden you left him.
Well, he stayed down low, we were catching. I had the slingshot, but he tried to come up, and I was a lot we hit. I was right up on the wall.
Tiff's stint was cut short with brake problems, the pedal needing to be pumped to get any response. But the fluid could hardly be boiling in these conditions. And so on through the night, with the lead contested by the lone Jaguar, the two Nissans held back by their slow pit stops, and the two leading Porsches of Tiff's team and poleman Bob Wallach.
12 hours gone, halfway through, and a very different event from last year, for the racing is still neck and neck. And that's taken its toll on the big cat, the Jaguar. It had been leading for a long time, but it's now started overheating and has been pushed behind the pits for major surgery. And we've just heard that the car that's inherited the lead, Wallach's Porsche, has got similar problems, and it looks as though he's out. But there is one bit of good news, at least it stopped raining.
So the front row of the grid was eliminated with overheating, probably the result of the unrelenting pace. Last year, the Jaguars had the race more or less won by midnight. This year was different. It took 90 minutes to replace the water pump and get the car back in the race, but 2 hours later, it was the same story, and that meant doing it all again.
Daytona. Shine your light on me.
Dawn at Daytona, and it looks as though it could be a nice morning, although there are some menacing clouds lurking about. Now the campers are starting to wake up to find that there's still very close racing to watch. 450 laps have been completed by the leaders, but the race is only 2/3 of the way through, and the situation still very fluid.
Barely an hour later, the long faces in the Dyson pit meant one solid development. With James Weaver driving, the Porsche's engine had let go, and it was curtains for Tiff and all at number 16.
It's unusual in a long race like this to have trouble with a Porsche. They're normally so reliable. But this race now is a 24-hour sprint race. If you don't go flat out, somebody else will. And normally the Porsche is the best car for that, so it's one of those things.
Oh, look, this is a tough race to win, you know. I mean, you can lose it easy, but it's a hard run to win.
Oh, well, what happens now to you?
I'll go home. Have a nice breakfast in the shower, and then off home, I think.
With 8 hours still to run, the race was now between the two Nissans and Porsche, with the second Yost car number 7 and the black Andretti 00. But with all the car problems, you could say the circuit was winning.
150 feet up here in the sky on top of the main grandstand, and you really get the feeling of this amazing racetrack. It was built for American NASCAR racing, where the monstrous saloons charge around the tri-oval track at average speeds of nearly 200 miles an hour. The infield gives the sports cars a little more work to do, and while the top speeds are just the same, it does mean that the average comes down to a slightly less hair-raising 125.
The next team to show the strain was Nissan, with pretty serious problems for Julian Bailey.
Well, it's unfortunate because we were leading at 7:30 quite comfortably. We had one tyre blow, which wasn't too bad, so the driver came in, Harry Lundijk, swapped drivers, I got in the car, and after about 5 laps the gearbox went, so now we have to change gearbox, which is going to basically lose us the race, but it's a shame really, because we were leading.
But they weren't the only ones in trouble. The dour Porsches for the Unsers and the Andrettis had had little time to prepare, and it showed. The Unsers went out with no replacement nose, and Mario Andretti suffered innumerable problems.
Some of those things you can expect in a 24-hour race. A little bit of luck. I think we could have won this thing. Just, you know, we're not the only ones saying that, however.
The banking really tests cars and drivers. After rain, it dries much quicker than the flat infield, so that wet weather tyres needed there tend to overheat in the banked turns.
You wouldn't find me up here during the race, but I couldn't resist coming to find just how steep it is. As you can see, I'm having difficulty standing up, and that's not surprising because it's at an angle of 31 degrees, and that's steep.
This is the only place in the world where sports cars compete on a banked track, but it didn't seem to bring in the crowds. That's more to do with the cars than the circuit, though. As for the Daytona 500 stock car race, every seat is taken. Nevertheless, there were 30,000 spectators present, but they were mainly in the infield, where barbecues and booze seemed to be as important as the racing. With the best will in the world, the crowd didn't look much like potential luxury car buyers, but Jaguar weren't principally appealing to race fans.
The people we sell to average almost $200,000 a year in income. Follows they're well-educated, they're intelligent people, they're people who have strong drives themselves, and even though most of them perhaps don't go motor racing or even watch motor racing, they like to think they're buying things from winners because they're winners themselves. So therefore, if we can find a way of winning, and obviously Jaguar has with motor racing, then it's something that we can put into our advertising which greatly appeals to a wide range of customers.
Jaguar's dream of 3 wins in 4 years at Daytona had faded, and Nissan's hope of a first 24-hour success also faltered with 7 stops to repair damaged bodywork. So the race didn't go to the fancied Nissan Hare, but the reliable Porsche Tortoise, shared by drivers with virtually unparalleled success in endurance racing.
If I can win it today, this will make 5 wins at this racetrack, and nobody's ever done that. It would also give me the lead in the all-time, the classic races, which is here, Daytona and Le Mans.
For Henri Pasquarolo, it was a first win at Daytona to add to his 4 at Le Mans.
It's quite different, but long distance race, it's very similar. You must really feel what is going on with the car, and you must not drive as you like, but as the car like, you know.
So Tiff's predictions proved accurate, except it wasn't his Porsche that ended up in victory lane. Still, he gleaned a certain consolation from the weekend.
We'd actually been leading for about 50 laps in the middle of the night, which was a wonderful experience just to go past the tower and look up and see the number on the top of the tower. But it was better to have led and lost than to have never led at all, I've decided.
Well, I'm sure we all wish Tiff better luck next time. That's about it for this week. I've been sanctioned to enjoy myself for a while in this very red Ferrari. The owner's got half a dozen other baubles quite like it to play with. But this particular car actually won the 1959 Tour de France before it was given this special Drogo body. Next week we test rather more homely transport in the shape of the new Mazda 121, and we look at the Peugeot Challenge designed to foster new rallying talent. See you then. Until then, drive as safely as I'm about to.